Hey there and welcome back to the Code Wrinkles channel for a brand new video. If you have watched other videos on the channel, I guess you already figured out that one of my major concerns, or the things that I'm really careful about always when I'm writing code or when I am looking through code bases, is to have controllers as clean as possible. And that's why we have a lot of videos on the Code Wrinkles channel on MediatR, how we should implement it and how we can use that, because that actually is one way to help us having more clean controllers. However, that's actually not the only way. And in this video right now, we will actually look into another very powerful way. I would say it's even overpowered, in which you can actually keep your controllers as clean as possible. Now, let's dive directly into it, and what I have here is kind of like the template for an API application in ASP.NET Core, but I have made some changes here to actually be able to show exactly what I mean. And one change that I have done here is we have this weather forecast class, but we also have this weather forecast DTO. Now, we have actually taken out the properties for temperature in Fahrenheit, because that one is calculated always based on the temperature in Celsius. So I have taken this out from the main class. This is actually our domain model. And we have then the DTO, and in the DTO we also have this one that, as said, gets calculated. And of course I have AutoMapper, through which I actually am able to map a weather forecast to a weather forecast DTO. Now, the purpose of this application right now is just to showcase the use of base controllers to keep your controllers clean. Of course, this is not the best practice on how you have to structure your application. On this topic, I have a lot of videos on this channel, so if you want to actually take a look into how I would suggest to structure your ASP.NET Core application in a proper way, then you might pause this video and go to the other videos and take a look at them. So this is only for demonstration purposes. When you create a real application, you should not create really everything in your ASP.NET Core application like I'm doing right now. And in fact, I know and I'm aware that there are a lot of things that might be wrong with this application right now. But once again, in this video, I just want to focus on the use or how we can unleash the power of base controllers to keep our controllers clean in our ASP.NET Core applications. So this being said, what I also have here, I have a greeting service. It's a very simple service, which just returns a hello there. We have this get greeting method, and I have added this service as a transient service, as you can see here. And you will see why just in a few minutes probably. And then I have also added AutoMapper because I want to map from the weather forecast to the weather forecast DTO. And I have also used MediatR. And for that, to get the forecast, we have here a query, get forecast query. We don't really need anything in this query. We just need the query as a class so that we can send this query to the MediatR. And then we have this handler, and all the cool stuff would happen here in this handler. And in this case, what I have done, I have actually just moved the functionality that we have in the standard template directly in the controller. I have moved this in the handler. And then, of course, in this weather forecast controller, what I'm doing here, I'm injecting the logger that comes by default with the template, and it's actually very important, and we will talk about this in the current video. I have the MediatR, I have the mapper, and I have the greeting service. So the way that you would have it in a regular ASP.NET Core application, if you use AutoMapper and MediatR, and maybe this service that could be an API level service that you might need to use. And then, of course, you inject them in the constructor, assign them to the private fields. And here in this method, I use the logger to actually log some information. And the information that I log is actually what we get from the greeting service. Then for the result, we just await the MediatR and we send this query. Then we actually transform or map the weather forecast or the list of weather forecasts to a list of weather forecast DTO, and we return the mapped result. So that's fairly easy and straightforward. However, if we take a better look at this controller right now, I don't really find it particularly clean, because what we end up doing is, if we have several other controllers and in all your API applications or even regular MVC applications, because by the way, guys, what I'm about to tell you here or show you here also applies to regular MVC applications, so it's not limited just to API applications. But the thing is that basically in each API or in each controller that you would have to create here for your application, you would have to inject the logger, you would have to inject the mediator, you would have to inject the mapper, and you probably would also have to inject this greeting service. And of course you would have to assign them, and this is some boilerplate code that you would have to duplicate actually in each controller that you create, in each new controller. And of course this is not what clean means by my standards. So let's maybe dive into a way in which we can make this controller even cleaner than that. And the way we would need to do this is, of course, we need to get rid of all this stuff here. So if we find a way to get rid maybe of the entire part here, so the private fields, the constructor and the assignments in the constructor, that would make our controller very, very clean. And the best way to do this, or the easiest way and very convenient, because you can set this up initially when you're setting up the application, and then you're really good to go and everybody can reuse that, is to take advantage of this concept of base controller and inheritance, like very plain and standard OOP inheritance. Now, I have seen in a lot of applications where a base controller is created by default, maybe, I don't know, to have there some methods that are used in other controllers, but that would kind of like be it. So, or in most code bases that I have seen, actually this base controller is totally missing. In others, even if it's there, it's actually not used at its potential. That could really help you to keep your controller very, very, very clean. So let's look into how we could actually achieve that. So if we go here in this controllers folder, and I say I want to have a new class here, and let's call this API base controller. So that would be the way to go. Now, I'm not sure exactly why Rider did this and not, well, let's create this from scratch. So let's add new class, and let's have here API base controller. And yeah, right now it's okay. Cool. Now, this would be our base controller. So it would inherit the controller base. If it's an API, it would inherit the regular controller class if this would be a regular MVC application. And of course, we have to import the missing using reference. Now, the first way that, or the first natural way in which we would think maybe that we can actually move all the private fields and the constructor injection from all our controllers is to actually have this in the constructor and private fields in our base controller. Now, in order to do that, let's just imagine that we can just move all this code here. For now, I'm not cutting it because I don't really want to have a lot of errors, and I want to actually go step by step with different stuff. So let's add here also the missing references, and then let's have the constructor. And what we could do here is, okay, let's, I don't know, let's put everything in a constructor here. Let's copy, let's go to our base controller, and yeah, let's have it like this. Of course, we would also need to inject all this stuff here. So yeah, let's just inject everything. However, with the ILogger, we will have a problem because the ILogger actually, as we can see, is actually a generic logger. So because it should be generic to each controller. Now, the thing is, okay, I have done this. Maybe I can make these fields to be protected. Let's say like this. Okay, let's also keep this protected, and let's keep this protected. Cool, and that would actually mean that theoretically in our base controller, or in our regular weather forecast controller, instead of inheriting from the base controller, we actually just want to inherit from API base controller. So that would be it. But if we take a look here, we see already that here we have kind of like an error. Base class base controller or API's base controller doesn't contain a parameterless constructor. So it means that the first hunch that we would regularly have to move basically everything in a controller, but we could even theoretically remove that like this. But in this case, well, we still have some problems here because you see that the base class API based controller doesn't contain a parameterless constructor. So we still have the same errors. So a lot of people that actually have thought about keeping this controller clean have actually tried this approach. And of course, as you can see, they stumbled upon this issue and they kind of like gave up. However, the idea is still correct. And if we are aware of all the features that we have in ASP.NET Core, we can actually make everything easier. Now, the way that I like to do is I would like to keep all these fields still private, but not read-only. And you will see in a second why. So once again, private, but not read-only. Then here, once again, private, but not read-only. So let's delete the read-only here. And last but not least, let's keep the private. And even if we inherit, I still think that it's the best way to actually keep the fields private and then expose properties or protected properties that can be reused in derived classes. So in this case, also private and without the read only. Now, the other thing is we would actually not even need this constructor anymore. However, what we would actually need here is, or are, some properties. So let's have here public. Let's start with the IMediator. IMediator, and yeah, let's call this mediator. And actually, we don't even need the get here. What we can do here is we can say always, okay, I want, and one other thing that we'll do here, we'll make all this nullable because theoretically they can be null. And yeah, then we'll have to actually do it like this. So it would be, so we are at the mediator, and we say that, hey, we want this to be equal to mediator, but if the mediator is null, then what we actually do, and this is actually, well, the most important part maybe of this video and how you can actually solve this problem. Now, the thing is, in the base controller or in the controller base, you have access to the HTTP context class. Now, on the HTTP context class, you have here a property request services. And if we take a look at here is, okay, it's the iService provider. So actually, the HTTP context already offers us a possibility to actually sneak into the service provider. And what this actually allows us is to maybe get a required service. And I want to get a required service of type IMediator. Cool. And then I am done with this property. And okay, then we can do exactly the same thing or for all the other properties. Like for instance, let's go here, public IMapper. So we move the mapper here. Let's call this mapper, but it's not public. Sorry for that. That would be protected. I said we want these properties to just be consumed in derived classes, so we'll make this protected. And here we have the mapper, and similar to what we actually have here is, instead of mediator, I would have here the mapper. And of course, if the mapper is null, then we want to get a required service that is of type IMapper, and then we should be good to go with this one. Now, we also need a property for our greeting service. And yeah, let's call this property greeting. And yeah, in this case, we just use greeting. And we get the required service of greeting service. Cool. Now, we have solved this problem for the mediator, for the mapper, and for the greeting service. However, we still have the logger, which is a little bit strange, because the logger usually is a generic logger. So we have to provide for each controller actually the name of the controller itself, so that we can really have a namespace for all the logs that are generated within the same controller. And we kind of like want to keep that functionality, so we still won't use the generic logger. And here is maybe the second step where a lot of developers would say, okay, I cannot do the same things with the ILogger, so I will still inject the ILogger in the regular controller through dependency injection in the constructor as we did earlier. However, we can leverage here the power of generics. And here we can say for instance, that we have an API-based controller, and it is a base controller of T, and we can even say here where T inherits API-based controller of T. So basically, we have a generic type constraint here that we apply the T, or the T should be actually only a derived class from this API-based controller. Now, the only thing that we do here is we change this to be the ILogger of T. And then, of course, we can do similarly to what we have done earlier. We can go here and say protected ILogger. And in this case, once again, we will use the T. And let's call this logger. And once again, as we did earlier, we can just use here the logger. Something like that. And required services. In this case, we would say that we want to have an ILogger of T once again. Cool. So we are actually done with this base controller now. And if we go back to the weather forecast controller, you can see that we already are constrained that we actually need to provide the type here, and we are in the weather forecast controller, so that is the type that we actually will provide here. Now the thing is, we can right now actually remove everything that we have in our controller so far, and the only thing that we still need to do is here replace this field. So instead of the field logger, we have this protected property logger that we can reuse. Instead of the field greeting, we have this protected greeting property that we can reuse, and then instead of this mediator field, we have the protected mediator that we have here. Okay, and instead of the mapper field, we have the protected mapper property, and we are actually good to go. And if you don't believe me, let's debug this and see that everything will work. Debug base controller. So now actually a browser window will open on the other monitor, and I will actually not bring it here on this monitor at all. We will just wait for it to start. I will do a request, and you will actually see that the request will be completed. Now, I'm really not sure exactly why the build process takes so much time, because usually it is way faster than that. Yeah, but hopefully that will actually. Okay. So right now the browser is open, and I will actually create a request right now, and you will see all the logs that will get executed. And you see that, hey, from the base controller for the weather forecast controller, we have this hello world. So the logger actually worked. And yeah, I said I don't show it, but if we take a look here, we have just also received our weather forecasts. So bottom line is right now the application is working, our API is working. And yeah, our controller is now really clean. Of course, we can also get rid of the unnecessary usings at the top. Of course, you could even move all the usings in a global usings file. But as you can see right now, our controller doesn't really have a constructor, doesn't really have a lot of fields. All the services that we actually need here are in the base controller and are exposed as protected properties in that base controller that our weather forecast controller can reuse. And just a few more words before we actually wrap this up is, if you are not using MediatR and if you are using regular services, you can still have a similar approach to that. Now, the thing that you will have to do, and that one, it will probably be a little bit more difficult just from the beginning. But if you have already a bunch of different controllers, and if you can take a look at them, you would probably notice that you can maybe group 2 or 3 controllers that kind of like use the similar services or the same services. So, and you can create different bunches of controllers that actually in which you actually inject the same services. So then, if you want to go for that approach, that would be a little bit more complicated. You can actually have a base controller where you kind of like would define and inject all the services that are common for really all controllers, like the logger, like if you use a mapper and things similar to that. But then you can create other base classes that would derive from API based controller, in which you would inject then the services that are needed only for that specific controller. And then in your controllers, you would, instead of inherit actually from the API base controller, you would inherit from something like weather forecast base controller that would have all the services that are needed for this weather forecast controller to work properly. And still, but I am really happy with the result, or with the achievement that we have right now, because instead of having right now, I don't know, maybe 20 lines of code that we had previously, we just have here this very simple method, and everything that we need actually is exposed to us via this base controller, and this keeps our code cleaner, easier to understand. And yeah, that's actually very important for us. This being said, if you think that this content was useful for you, don't be shy and hit the thumbs up button. Of course, hit the subscribe button if you didn't subscribe already. And also make sure that you let other people know about this content that you found useful. You can use, I don't know, your social networks, forums, Reddit, wherever you might have peers or colleagues or friends that might be interested in this content. Don't be shy and share it with them, because sharing is caring. They will appreciate that, and it will really help a lot. And if you have any questions or just want to say hi or get in touch with me, also don't be shy and just leave a comment. Comments are really important for videos on YouTube, because the engagement through comments would actually help these videos show up more and more in searches for other users that might be interested in this type of content. Once again, this being said, thank you very much for watching, and until the next time, I wish you the very best.